Welcome to today's CMG webinar. If you're not familiar with the organization, Computer Measurement Group is a not-for-profit worldwide organization of technology professionals that are committed to the sharing of information and best practices focused on ensuring efficiency and scalability of IT. We offer both in-person events and online programs like this one, and you can learn more about those at cmg.org/calendar. Thank you so much for joining us for Performance and Capacity Insights for your outsourced ZOS mainframe. This session today is sponsored by IntelliMagic in partnership with Edge Solutions and Consulting. And before we get started with our speaker introductions, I do want to make sure that you know that you can submit questions through the GoToWebinar panel in the Questions tab. We'll be doing Q&A at the end of today's session, and if we do not get to your question, we'll be posting the questions and the answers on the blog, and this video will also be available after the webinar. And with that, I'm very excited to introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Brent Phillips. Brent is the Managing Director of IntelliMagic in the Americas. He's been working with enterprise software for over 30 years, starting with IT operations while in university and later as a systems programmer. He has a history of technology, entrepreneurship, and he actually was he started IntelliMagic's US operations in 2005. Joining us from Edge Solutions is Charles Hinkle. Chuck has over 35 years experience in the IT industry with a focus on System Z technologies. He also has 12 years experience as a mainframe systems programmer and spent 20 years with IBM. His work is in the design and deployment of resilient systems. And last but not least, Cheryl Watson is joining us. She is the president and co-founder of Watson & Walker, and she is internationally known for her passion and enthusiasm for IBM mainframes and the systems or the software that runs on them. And you may also be familiar with Cheryl Watson's tuning newsletter. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Brent. Brent, welcome.
Great. Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I think it's a topic of interest to a lot of people. We had last count I knew about was something like 350 people register for this session. So it's got a lot of interest on both sides of the house because it's just a topic that comes up a lot these days, and I think we've got some interesting content for you. So I'm happy to have Chuck Hinkle join me, and of course Cheryl Watson as well, very well known in the performance and capacity planning discipline in the industry. So the time today will be split up between the three parties here, IntelliMagic, and both of our partners, Edge and Watson Walker. So I'm going to talk just a little bit for a few minutes on the big picture regarding the need for performance and capacity planning insights and the role that some new visualization technology about the RMF and SMF data can provide in enhancing and making it easier to access the performance and capacity insights that are needed for this kind of environment. Chuck Hinkle then from Edge will talk about a joint use case that IntelliMagic and Edge worked together that was providing some advisory services for an outsourced customer. And then Cheryl Watson will talk about her in-depth experience working with outsourcing on both sides of the fence, actually, and then some cost optimization topics as well. But we'd like to start off actually with just a quick poll for the people that are on the webinar. So Amanda, if you could launch that for us, we'll get a little bit of input from you on your role in IT outsourcing. So just choose one selection there, whether you're currently outsourced, in the process of outsourcing, considering outsourcing, outsourced but plan to insource, or not outsourced without plans, or if you work for an outsourcer, which we have some people in here on the webinar for that as well. So we'll let it go up just a little bit more to get more people voting, and then we'll close and proceed. Okay, great. I think we'll go ahead for the sake of time and close this out. Great, thank you, Amanda. Okay, so you should be able to see my slides again here. I'd like to start off just by with a couple of comments on the common reasons to outsource. It's really quite gaining more traction than it has in the past from my perspective. I think it's a more of an executive level decision often, and there's three common reasons that resonate, I think, with executives. Of course, one of them is just what's core to the business, and a lot of companies, this is probably one of the reasons why cloud is also quite popular as well, to be able to focus on your own core competency, which is not necessarily IT for a lot of organizations. The idea of reducing risk as well in delivering the IT services with somebody that does have a core focus on the delivery of IT, the infrastructure and the service levels, and understands how to keep the environment modern regarding security and performance and all the different aspects that are involved in that is pretty compelling. And then, of course, cost is an issue as well on the platform. How can we contain our costs? And if somebody if this is all that they do, there is an economy of scale there that's can provide some cost benefits. The question, though, becomes when an outsourcing engagement is begun and is running, what are the common areas of struggles? And as you can probably see from the slide already, it tends to be in the same areas. So one of the things that I'd like to point out here is if a business application is core for the organization, the efficient delivery of its required service levels is also core. There's a lot depending in today's economy on the digital infrastructure course for virtually every organization out there. And so that's an issue, and it can become a struggle in this relationship, and that's what one of the primary points we want to talk about today. Risk as well. Often the experts involved in this, we understand and know many people that are involved on the outsourcing side as well. There's very smart people there, very dedicated people that care about providing the right service levels for customers. But there is a lot of sharing of the resources among multiple customers. And there's a question about who has the incentive to proactively optimize the performance in an environment, and that can affect the risk equation as well, make that a little bit more of a struggle. And then the same question really comes up on the cost side of the equation as well. Who has the incentive to optimize the cost? So these are some questions we'll deal with in the webinar here. From a inhibitor perspective on what contributes to those struggles that are pretty common. There was a link on that last slide as well that you may want to go back to regarding a survey that was done on some of these issues. So you'll get a copy of these slides after the webinar. But the financial and contractual arrangement is one of the things that inhibits the provision of these things. If the contract will specify, pretty explicitly what the responsibilities are, the outsourcer tends to allocate the margin, which from the contract, and it's difficult to make new investments for additional optimization. A lot of times the cost will get passed on to the customer, so there's no incentive to optimize from a cost perspective as well, and people are just busy, as we said. So organizationally, there's additional layers of processes and people involved. So when change needs to happen and new reports or perspectives or problem solving, there's just more things to deal with there. And as we mentioned, the human resources are often shared between different customers as well. So there's a little bit less of an understanding of the nature of your particular application and that. From the technical side, there's also a lot of new change on the platform that's happened in the last 5 years or so with additional metrics from pervasive encryption, for example, or data compression, or the type 72s that are written for mobile workloads that have value for transaction reporting, for example. And it's just difficult to modernize the reporting from all of these new metrics in this relationship, or it at least takes additional effort and sometimes funding to be able to process those and understand what it means for your business applications, particularly because the outsourcers are, like most of the on-premise customers, still using a 30-year-old process to understand the performance of the applications and the infrastructure from the perspective of the infrastructure. Generally, it's a catalog of static reports that are created, literally hundreds or sometimes thousands of different reports that can be reviewed, and it requires somebody to essentially eyeball those reports and understand what they mean for your infrastructure and how it's delivering service levels for your applications. So these are really issues that are applicable in either the on-premise when you're running your own infrastructure or in an outsourced environment. To be able to predict problems is pretty rare, mainly because of this technology reason, and it's true on both sides of the house. It just takes too much time and expertise to see problems as they are developing, and then when they are identified, to be able to understand what the root cause is for that. And the flip side of the same issue is just regarding the optimization of the costs. It's a complex environment with a lot of moving parts, and it's difficult to get the visibility and the time to understand that. For predicting hardware cost and capacity planning, similar kind of issue. And not helping the situation, of course, is the skills gap, which is the worst in the mainframe area for the performance and capacity planning area. It's even worse than the application development side of the house, because it's a lot easier to train somebody how to program on the mainframe than it is to understand what all the metrics mean and how the metrics interact with each other on the infrastructure in delivering the performance that's required for your applications. So new technology can help overcome these struggles. That's what IntelliMagic is in business with. Our solution is called IntelliMagic Vision, to automatically assess the millions of metrics that are generated, sometimes on an hourly basis, depending on the size of your infrastructure. And it provides a very important validation, really, for both the outsourcer as well as the business side of the house on the health of the infrastructure, stress that's developing in the infrastructure, and makes it easier to validate the SLAs that may be in the the outsourcer agreement, and the cost optimization, the efficiency of the delivery, so on and so forth. So that's essentially what we've partnered with Watson Walker and with Edge Solutions on this kind of technology, with their expert advice on making it very fast and easy to understand the environment. So there's multiple modules in our product to be able to give an end-to-end visualization of the environment, scanning millions of metrics, automatically assessing them, and tying them together for very quick root cause analysis to understand the infrastructure performance. So you'll get these slides again afterwards, just for the sake of time. I'm not going to talk about kind of the underlying details of all the different record types for each parts of the infrastructure that we're processing and correlating together, but they're there as a reference. It is important perhaps to understand that what we're talking about here today is available off-platform in a cloud delivery to produce these kind of analytics that are easily accessible from IntelliMagic consultants, Edge consultants, Watson Walker consultants, or for the business side, the analysts that you have in your own environment, working with your business application owners, and of course for the outsourcer analysts as well. So my last slide here is just to talk a couple of seconds about the benefits of this kind of approach to the environment, to be able to deliver the availability levels that are required for the applications more quickly, more consistently, to be able to be more predictive on the infrastructure issues and how some constraints and bottlenecks are very likely to affect the delivery of those SLAs if you have some spikes, a little bit of growth in your workloads, and how it impacts MLC, and then just the validation of your plans for the environment as well. It turns out that making it a lot easier to understand what the data means for your applications and your infrastructure opens up some new opportunities as well to see infrastructure health dashboards by application. We can segment out the workloads from the infrastructure resources that are shared between applications, so you can get an application by application view. This also makes it easier to incorporate in the application development testing arena to create a performance signature from the infrastructure's perspective by application. We have a recorded webinar on that topic as well on our website, and doing some of the things that a lot of people are doing today in terms of understanding cross-platform applications, with the mainframe serving as the back-end transactions and integrating that kind of performance data together with data from a non-mainframe kind of platform as well. So that's the first part. At this point, we'll switch over to Chuck Hinkle, and he'll talk about a case study using IntelliMagic Vision with a large outsourced organization. Okay.
Brent, can you guys hear me?
Yep, you're live.
Okay. There we go. I lost the your screen show there. But,
oh, that's good. You're good. Just put it in show mode, and we're
yep.
good.
One moment, please. Okay. So, as mentioned, my name is Chuck Hinkle, and I manage the mainframe technical team at Edge Solutions and Consulting. So, my team has actually been together as a unit for over 20 years now, and we have focused on helping companies design and build out resilient mainframe infrastructures for quite some time. We've worked with companies throughout the U.S. and many abroad in the construction and implementations of technologies that provide both HA and DR for these mainframe environments. You know, some utilizing even in 2 or 3 or even 4-site architectures. This has afforded us an opportunity, though, to go in and out of many different customer accounts, and has introduced us to lots of them that are outsourced. And as a course of that, has given us a bunch of insight into many of the benefits and some of the challenges, you know, that are inherent in these environments. So I'm going to go through some of the areas that we like to focus on. And as Brent mentioned, IntelliMagic and Edge have been working very closely together because the powerful analytics of the IntelliMagic for, you know, the IntelliMagic Vision for ZOS tool enables us to do a great amount of predictive analysis when we go into these environments to help our customers. So from an infrastructure analysis and modernization perspective, and the use case that I'll talk about briefly at the end fell into line with this very, very well. A lot of the areas that we like to focus on, starting with an initial analysis of the resiliency capability of the current environment. I mean, in an outsourced environment, there's very often service level agreements in place that are measured very often in terms of recovery time and recovery point objectives. And sometimes there needs to be an in-depth analysis of that infrastructure to make sure that, you know, in the event of an actual outage, that infrastructure really is equipped to be able to provide those levels of resiliency. So we do spend a lot of time working with companies to, at the outset, validate that, you know, the resiliency capabilities of the environment that are being provided by the outsourcer are actually equipped and tested to be able to provide that level of failover and high availability. And then we go deeper into assessments of the actual mainframe infrastructure. So very often, you know, outsourced companies, you know, the environment is never static. And additional investments are always going to be required over time to enhance and improve and expand those environments. And so capacity studies are very often necessary. And the team, my team, has worked closely with Brent and his and the IntelliMagic platform to be able to dig in and do some predictive analysis from a capacity perspective. New workloads coming on board, being able to predict, you know, what is that going to look like? Currently, are we going to overflow CPU or MSU capacities? And what is this going to look like to even 3 to 5 years out? new workloads coming on board and being able to predict what that's going to look like so that investment by the companies with their outsourced provider can be budgeted and predictable. There's also been quite a bit of analysis from some of these companies from a security standpoint, both from access controls that can sometimes span multiple organizations when we're working with outsourcers and other companies, but as well as what I'll call security of data, so that the infrastructure can be reviewed to ensure that testing does not impact production capabilities. And we've had situations where that has been the case. And so some of the analyses that we provide can also dig in and validate that, both from a KEC perspective and from a storage perspective, that things are properly isolated so that testing doesn't impact production. And then basic sysplex architecture reviews. How is the sysplex constructed? Is it functioning optimally from a coupling facility perspective? All the architecture involved in a sysplex, again, from an optimization standpoint. Because one of the key metrics is an optimized environment is going to be the most cost-effective environment. And so optimizing both from the storage and from the sysplex perspective becomes key. And then also over time, being able to exploit new technologies as they come out. We found in many situations that while the outsourcer may be providing a very, very good service to the company, sometimes the mainframe skills within the company tend to wane a bit over time. And Edge, again, leveraging IntelliMagic Vision and also cooperating with Watson and Walker, we're able to come in and provide or help fill that void and help provide this predictive analysis that enables these companies to optimize, make sure their environment is optimized, be predictive in the amount of upcoming spend necessary to expand it and enhance it over time, and then also being in a position to be able to exploit new technologies such as Brent mentioned, like pervasive encryption and those types of technologies, again, to the benefit of both the customer and the smooth operation of the outsourced environment. Then we've also engaged with what we'll call more detailed capacity and performance reviews. Again, looking at what current state of the environment is, looking at what workloads are coming down the pike that need to be deployed on it and what impact that may have, like to the current MSUs or MIPS that are available, and also being able to predict that out for, like I said, up to 3 to 5 years time, so that the investments that are required over time in these environments can be budgeted and can happen in a much more smooth fashion. And then one of the final things that we do like to assist the customers with is from a software utilization perspective. So SO agreements vary widely depending on the company. Many companies can own their own software licenses and manage it that way. Some of the SO providers manage that. But a lot of it has to do with duplication of potential software, and then the software, and especially the ISVs that are out there running, what are they actually consuming from an MSU perspective? And again, being able to be predictive so that the actual MSUs that are being used by the ISV products can be scheduled and budgeted for when it comes time to upgrade and renew those software agreements. So talking briefly about the use case, it followed very closely to a lot of the analysis and services that were described on the prior chart. And this company, again, had an outsourced mainframe, and they did have and do have a significant new workload that is about to be introduced into the environment. And they did have a gap in their mainframe skills and communication of proper requirements of the new application in the environment. There were some communication gaps there between the company and what the SO provider was constructing to support it. So the Edge team was able to get in there and work with this company, actually act as a liaison between the company and the outsourced provider, and being able to leverage the tool set and document what software utilizations were, what capacity requirements were going to be required for this new workload as it came up, and also be able to be predictive in how software licensing would be renewed, the costs associated with that. And also there were some issues around, as I mentioned, some impacts from testing that was impacting some production processing. So some analysis in that area and the ability to completely segregate that from a data and a processor perspective provided the company with a lot more stable environment. Testing was done with a lot more confidence, and that helped to speed up the time frame for getting this new workload, integrated into the new environment. And one of the key items that was an outcome of this, I mean, there were lots of benefits for both sides, but for the outsourced company, it really benefited them because the output of a lot of the analysis optimized the customer's current environment, and what that ended up doing was validating the spend that needed to take place for the future workload coming on board. And the company being able to validate that and predict it and budget it actually helped speed up the procurement of that with the outsourced provider. So the outsourcer was able to be more proactive. They were able to be more predictive. And then from a cost perspective and cost savings, the environment being optimized drove down the necessary infrastructure spend that was required. So all in all, it was a win-win situation for both the company and the outsourced provider. This type of analysis and this type of artificial intelligence provided by the vision tool and looking into a lot of the metrics that are, like Brent mentioned, so difficult sometimes to corral, provided a very powerful solution for this company and for the outsourced provider. And as it sits right now, the projects are all back on track. The new workloads being integrated, and some fairly significant cost savings were realized, as well as some stability in the environment and validation of recovery capabilities, should the worst occur. So that's an overview of the type of consulting and services that play a big role in leveraging the Vision platform, and then also some of our reach back into Watson and Walker for some of Cheryl's sage advice when necessary. So with that, I guess at this point, I would like to turn it over to Cheryl and get some of her insights over the course of the years that she's been dealing with the SO companies. So Cheryl, take it away.
Unmute.
Yeah,
okay.
You're good.
Hi there. Before I start into my section, I got to tell you how we came about getting involved with IntelliMagic. Some of you may know Frank Kine, who is the current author of the tuning letter that my husband named after me. So it's Cheryl Watson's tuning letter. Frank is now the author, and he also does a lot of consulting. Ex-IBMer, parallel sysplex guru. He has a lot of consulting offers, and we needed a tool that looked at SMF. We spent 2 years looking at all of the tools out there and decided that IntelliMagic Vision was the one we liked the most. I don't know if many of you know their founder, Hubert Hudekammer, who I have always admired, a brilliant man. And when I first saw IntelliMagic Vision, my thought was, dang, I wish I had this when I was doing performance and capacity planning. The reason is it's machine learning to some extent, where it can read all those reports that I used to read every morning when I would come in, and it would have it done for me. IntelliMagic Vision would have it done for me, highlighting and identifying any of the things that I wanted it to. So when we needed a tool, we reached out to IntelliMagic, and we first of all went to their customers, who always said they really come through for us. They listen to us. So they had the same type of attitude we have toward our customers, in that we want them to be happy. We've only recently been introduced to Edge and have started working with them, but we know a lot of the people because they've been in the IBM world for a long time, and their customers have the same attitude about them. So we're very, very excited to be in this group of what we consider people who are trying to do the best for their customers. Now, speaking of doing the best for your customers, we come to outsourcing. And I have been involved with outsourcing since 1970. I've been involved in MVS since '65, when the first MFT, MVT 360 came out. For 10 years, I worked for EDS, who at that time was called, outsourcing was called facilities management. And it's outsourcing as it is, as we know it today. And after I left them, after 10 years, I ended up consulting back to those same outsourced customers, trying to work on their behalf. And throughout my career, I've been involved with pricing and contracts. And in today's world, one of the studies that Brent mentioned earlier showed that CEOs, CIOs, their main concern is cost, and software cost is the biggest part of that, 35 to 50%, depending on what you're doing. And that's what our customers care about. So we've been writing about them. We have been focused on those. And so the emphasis today is more on these software pricing issues, and we teach classes. In fact, last year, we launched a new service to help manage MLC cost. These are things that I've learned from outsourcing. It can be a great thing. Simplify the IT concerns, the IT involvement, especially if you are looking to get off the mainframe. But for many outsourced clients who are growing, and I want to mention that because we see more and more people who people are being outsourced, but their work is growing, their volume is growing, and they're finding that the cost is higher than they expected, and maybe they're not getting the same service that they expected. And so we go in to try to help those people. One thing you need to know is that outsourcers write the contracts, and they have experience with hundreds of these. The client, this is usually the first time they've seen an outsourcing contract, so they don't know what to look for. The contracts in general are very vague. They can be interpreted in many ways, and normally there's a clause that says, one, you can't tell anybody you're outsourced, and two, if we disagree on anything, it's going to go to arbitration. So being vague and not being able to talk to anybody means that there's usually a disagreement on many of the items in the contract, such as maintaining, there might be a clause in the contract that says, we agree to maintain the current service level agreements. And you say, great. That sounds like it ought to do it. But to the customer, that means that during their peak period from 2 to 3 o'clock, they have their biggest volume of customers, and they are used to half a second kicks response time. The outsourcer, and they aren't doing this on purpose, but the outsourcer's reporting might show average kicks response time averaged over the day, not during peak period. They're both right in their own right. They both meet the contract, but they're totally different things. So what happens is there are disagreements. My belief is that whether it's a win-win for both sides is how well written and how well managed the contract is. And it's not just one contract. You renegotiate over a period of time. And of course, the outsourcer is very invested by this time and wants to keep the customer. And the customer is sometimes happy, sometimes not. But it's during renegotiation that those things come to a head and need to be resolved. And I also believe that the people involved in the contracts are generally procurement staff who don't understand things like if you add an LPAR or duplicate an LPAR, the software costs go up because now you have another LPAR where KICS and DB2 and COS live. They don't necessarily understand that assigning all the CPs to all the LPARs adds overhead that will increase the cost. So that's why I think that the client has to keep some technical in-house expertise. And if they've lost that, or maybe somebody's retiring, they need to bring in consultants to provide that support. And that's where I think that Edge comes in to provide that. So I'm going to talk about what I consider to be the top 3 problems in outsourcing. Now, there are more than these, but these are the big ones. The labor costs are based on MIPS or MSUs. I'll talk about that. The hardware and software tends to be outdated, and there's lack of knowledge in-house. Anybody remember this? I can't remember if this was a 360 or a 370. It's an old IBM machine. The solutions to all of those: write good contracts, keep some technical staff on behalf of the client, whether you have to bring consultants in or in-house, and you need to understand the pricing options, and you need to understand the contract. I was talking to one outsourcer the other day who was a capacity planner and didn't know what the costs were for each of the software piece products. And I thought, geez, how do you do capacity planning if you don't know what the costs are of increasing this workload or that LPAR? And it's like doing it with handcuffs on. So I think that not only the outsourcer, but the client needs to understand what things cost money and what things are free. So these 3 items, the labor cost based on MIPS or MSUs. The majority of outsourcing contracts are often based on the peak rolling 4-hour average of the MSUs during the month. That might get converted to MIPS, but that's the basis. The reason for that is that the major cost of ZOS is the software charge that is based on that peak rolling 4-hour average. So IBM has a nice little report. It's called SCRT, Subcapacity Reporting Tool, that provides that information that says what's the peak rolling 4-hour average. And the theory is the more work you're doing, the more work the outsourcer has to do to manage it. If only it were that simple. Because what happens then, if an outsourcer lowers the peak MSUs or MIPS, they end up lowering their income. So there's really little incentive to tune the system. I remember one time when I came back from a CMG conference, this was back in the early 70s, I was so proud of myself because I had learned that using half-track blocking, this is half-track blocking, not full-track blocking, back in the day, would reduce CPU time and reduce IOs and reduce elapsed time. It was a win-win-win-win-win situation. So I turned around and I came back. I'm working for EDS at this time. I go into our customer's production JCL, which I was allowed to do as a performance analyst. I changed everything to half-track blocking. Man, our runs were finishing an hour earlier. The CPU time dropped. The number of IOs dropped. I was so proud. I just could only imagine what my bonus was going to be. Until I told my boss what I'd done, and he looked at it and said, "Thanks, Cheryl. You just lowered our income by $50,000 a month." I was devastated. That was the first time that I realized that there was a conflict. So the solution, and we just had a customer do this just a month ago. When they were renegotiating their contract, they separated the base outsourcing charge from the MSUs. So they said, okay, we're going to pay you X amount every month. And then we're going to pay our software cost based on the SCRT report. And we will pay you for every time you can reduce the MSUs, because our software bill will go down. And we can share the cost savings. So you reduce it by $50,000 a month. The outsourcer gets $25,000. The client has a reduction of $25,000. Everybody's happy. So it's something to consider. I believe this one thing causes the majority of frustration in outsourcing contracts. The second thing that I see a lot, and realize that our customers are both outsourcers and outsourced clients. See, I have never met an outsourcer that doesn't try to do the very best they can for their customer. But as Brent said earlier, they don't have the bandwidth. They may have multiple clients. There's everybody's understaffed these days. They can't do everything they want to for the customer. And so one of the major problems is that every time an outsourcer upgrades to a new software release or hardware release, not only is it costly to the outsourcer because of their time, but it provides very little benefit to them. Likewise, keeping current with APARs and PTFs takes a lot of time and introduces risk, another risk to the outsourcer. They don't like to do that. Risk is bad, and these things introduce risk. Well, what you're left with is old hardware, old software. And, you know, every time you have a hardware update, you can get a reduction on your software of between 5 and 10%. So why wouldn't you want that? Because it adds a risk. So a solution in the contract, I always recommend that you specify in the contract, hardware can't be more than 2 generations old, software can't be more than 2 releases old, and you specify the minimum level of currency for APARs and PTFs. I don't suggest you install an RSU the month it becomes available, but I wouldn't want to wait 2 years to install it, if you know what I mean. And then the third thing I said was lack of knowledge in-house. In the majority of cases, all the technical staff is transferred to the outsourcer. They understand everything, but one of the reasons that people outsource is because they have an aging staff who are going to be retiring soon, and they need to train new blood. Well, the outsourcer has lots of new blood, you hope, but the knowledge is going away. So part of outsourcing when I was in it was we had to document everything we were doing. So one of the biggest benefits of outsourcing is that somebody is going to document the procedures for running your IT work, which is really, really important. But it also means that only the outsourcer understands service level objectives, understands whether the contract is being met. So the solution is to keep somebody technical in-house or use somebody like Edge or us to monitor and manage the contract and deliverables. And that's what's so nice about IntelliMagic Vision. There was a chart that Brent showed that says everybody can look at the data at the same time. So the outsourcers can look at it, the clients can look at it, consultants can look at it and say, hey, here's a problem. What are the solutions? And maybe the solution will come from one or multiples from all of those. But in the contract, one of the things that you have to do is make sure that the client can access that measurement data. I've gone into sites where the client cannot look at monitors, cannot look at ParmLive, cannot look at SMF data. And so how do they audit how the outsourcer is doing? Now, if you're going to keep your in-house staff, keep them trained. Go to CMG, go to conferences, take classes. Now, to show you what I mean by expertise, the next slide is from one of the IntelliMagic Vision reports for showing peak rolling 4-hour average for the day. Now, I'm going to talk about this slide, but I'm going to go to the graph itself. So this is the same time frame showing MSUs, rolling 4-hour average, and MSUs in two different ways. On the left, the blue line shows the actual MSUs. The red line shows the rolling 4-hour average. On the right, it shows the same CPU time. You can see the graphs kind of match, but shows it by importance level, where discretionary is that bright blue. So now what you've got is you have one report that shows how you're doing, and you can tell a lot, learn a lot from this graph. For example, one of the things that I would look at is when those MSUs go up so high, the first thing we can tell is that WLM must be doing a pretty good job of managing, because discretionary is almost cut off when the rolling 4-hour average goes past the capped amount or the defined amount. There are cases where that blue would dominate, which says that no, maybe workload manager, maybe the policy is wrong. The other thing, Chuck was talking about, the customer wanted to add some new workload. If you wanted to add workload and he wanted to add workload off peak, it would be almost free. But if you wanted to move workload during the peak, then it was either going to bump up the cost of the software during that time, or you'd have to find a solution. And going backwards to the previous slide, the second from the bottom, you've got some choices. You can move other work out of the peak. You can look at pricing options. There's a new pricing option called ZCap. There's something called container pricing. You could implement some type of capping or tune the work currently running during that peak. And so when I mean technical expertise, either your outsourcer is going to do this, and in many cases reduce their income, or you're going to ask for it to be done. This is a little show at SCRT Pro where one of the things we do is add dollars to the product. So we take your SCRT reports for every product. We show what the cost is each month, and we could do that before you even submit your report to IBM, and tell you maybe there are times you should exclude. We confirm back with the invoice, but we could tell where you need to concentrate and which products should be in which LPARs. So if you want some free things, you can get a review of your SCRT reports by sending us an email. You can sign up for our blog. We're not very good at writing blogs. We have about one a month if we're lucky. After today, I'm going to put a couple of articles on outsourcing up on our website. And I give a 3-day on-site class on pricing, on-site to everybody in your organization, so procurement and capacity and performance. And we give that both to outsourcers and outsourced clients. And if you haven't seen our newsletter, you can let us know, and we'll send you one. So I hope that has been interesting. If you have questions, please let us know. And thank you. And I think Brent's going to take over a poll now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cheryl. Amanda, if you could go ahead and launch that poll. I think I speak for everybody. It's just very enjoyable to listen to you, Cheryl, a wealth of experience. So thank you very much for spending some time with us today. We have a couple of minutes left as this poll launches. Let me just switch the slide here. As the poll launches, you can go ahead and submit some questions. We won't have time for a lot of questions here, but we will be able to get back to you by email to answer a question if you have any questions for any of the parties today. So the poll is up and people are voting. We'll give it just a couple of minutes here and then we'll go to questions.
Brent, did you mention all of the different webinars and documents you have on your website for more information?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I should have mentioned that. There's some links. Actually, let's see. Yeah, the domain name is IntelliMagic.com. Amanda, why don't you go ahead and close out the poll so they can see the screen? I think is my correct screen showing. It's got the emails from each of the parties that spoke. At IntelliMagic.com, there are a lot of resources available under the ZOS and resources menu for recorded webinars, for recorded short videos and demonstrations, for white papers on a variety of topics as well. And this webinar will be one of the things that we put up there. The papers that Cheryl mentioned on her site as well, the articles and so on, are valuable resources. So we certainly encourage you to take advantage of that at the different domain names that are available there. And please send us an email if there's any need for access and finding out where some of these resources are. I'd be certainly happy to assist you in any way that we can. Thank you for answering that poll. Amanda, are there some questions just in the last minute here? We're at 1 minute before the hour, so.
I've got one question for you, and while I'm reading it, if you would go ahead and post the email addresses up.
Okay, so sorry, show screen. Yeah, sorry, I thought that was showing. There we go.
All right. This question is, can you provide an estimate for how many outsourced sites have significant but unrealized performance and cost optimization, just based on the different issues that you've discussed?
Okay, that's a great question. I think, Cheryl, you've got the most experience working with outsourcing sites. Do you have a response for that?
It's hard to say, because when you think about it, we're only going to hear about those that are having problems. If they're happy and all their service levels are being met, or they don't have any issues, we're not going to hear from them. So anything I provide is going to be biased.
Right. Yeah.
I see the problems. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. People don't come to you and tell you how happy they are, right? So.
No. I wish they would.
Yeah, that's nice to hear as well, and I'm sure there's cases like that. So, well, we are a little bit after the top of the hour, so please do submit some questions that we'll get back to you in writing on, and we appreciate your time, everybody. We did have one question about the handouts and the webinars, I know, so you'll get a recording, you'll get a follow-up email with this material and a PDF as well as the recorded link. So again, thank you everybody for attending today. Cheryl, thank you for your time. Chuck and Amanda, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.